Hey there guys, how are you doing? This is Rob, welcome back to the channel, and I have to say, happy birthday to me. Yes, that is correct. Today, Tuesday, July 16th, is my 44th birthday. And so, what do I want to do to celebrate my birthday today? I want to talk about Metroid. Of course, that's no surprise to any of you guys, because talking about Metroid is what I do. And I don't even have to repeat to you guys that we're living in a post-Metroid Prime 4 Beyond world, because I've been obsessed with it ever since the reveal. That's all I've been talking about on the channel entirely, which just feels so great, because as I've mentioned many times since the reveal of Metroid Prime 4 a few weeks ago, this is something that I've been waiting to be able to do through Rule of Two Review for 7 years, and now I can finally do so. So what I want to do today when talking about Metroid is actually take a look at the Nintendo Switch as a whole and really recognize and appreciate that it's kind of Nintendo's current Metroid machine. In a post-Metroid Prime 4 world, it's really exciting to take a look at what the Switch has offered in terms of being able to play brand new Metroid games, or just large-scale Metroid games, I would say, because I'm not really talking about the NSO as a service that gives us access to older games, although that's fantastic. But plenty of Nintendo consoles have offered similar versions of that before. Microsoft and Sony also offer versions of that for PlayStation and Xbox, and it's great across the board. I love that all of the console manufacturers have something like that. And of course I love that through NSO you can play Super Metroid and Zero Mission and Fusion and the original Metroid and all of this stuff. I believe Metroid 2, I think, is also available. I'm not currently subscribed to NSO, so don't blame me if I'm wrong. I actually don't pay attention to the Metroid games on there because I have them otherwise and I don't need the NSO to play them, so I might be behind on some of what's available. But like I said, I'm talking about newer, large-scale games that you can buy and play for your Switch that are Metroid games. And here's what's crazy about this, guys. Let's stop and really take stock of what's happening with the Nintendo Switch. Again, in a post-Metroid Prime 4 Beyond reveal world, which is, depending on how you look at what's available on the Nintendo Wii, you could say that the Nintendo Switch has had the best and most plentiful, bountiful offering of Metroid games to be able to play. When all is said and done, by the time Metroid Prime 4 Beyond releases on the Nintendo Switch, and we're not even factoring in whether or not a next-generation Switch 2 version comes, for this conversation, the Switch 2 version of Metroid Prime 4, the theoretical version, I should say, doesn't really matter, because we already know that Metroid Prime 4 will be releasing on the current Nintendo Switch as we know it. And so by the time that game releases, there will have been 3 major releases, retail packaged, full-on releases of Metroid games that you can buy and play for the Nintendo Switch. 2 of them wholly brand new, developed specifically for the Nintendo Switch. Of course, we're talking about Metroid Dread. We are including Metroid Prime Remastered because that is a new release. It is a remastered, remade version of a classic game. It's not just a regular re-release. It is a totally redone game. It is something you can buy in physical fashion. Many of us own that. And then, of course, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond once that's released. So we will have 3 huge games: Metroid Dread, Metroid Prime Remastered, and Metroid Prime 4. And on top of that, not only do we have the remade, remastered version of my #1 favorite video game of all time, Metroid Prime, but Metroid Dread represents a long gestating sequel to the 2D Metroid series. Metroid Prime 4 technically is a long gestating sequel to the Prime series. So Nintendo chose the Nintendo Switch to be the console and the hardware to shepherd in a new era for both the 2D Metroid series and the 3D first-person Prime series, and say, here's a new entry in the 2D games, here's a new entry in the first-person Prime games. That is crazy, and we have never seen anything like this happen before. Again, the Switch is really prolific when it comes to these new Metroid games, okay? Because if you look at all of Nintendo's prior consoles, both home consoles and handhelds, and the Metroid games that have been made available for them, and there have been plenty, there's no one system that has had this much Metroid love releasing on it in this fashion, to this degree, right? Again, I'm not including like virtual consoles on the Wii and the Wii U and the 3DS And I'm not including NSO even on the Switch. I'm talking about newly released games or remade games, right? I mean, Metroid was on the NES, Metroid 2 was on the Game Boy, and Super Metroid was on the Super Nintendo. That's one game per console. Then we get into some multiple releases, and it's a little bit tricky when you look at the Nintendo Wii. But we look at the GameCube, you had Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2, so you've got two games on that console. And you look at some of the handhelds, the Game Boy Advance had Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion. The Nintendo DS had Metroid Prime Hunters and Metroid Prime Pinball, all right? So we're looking at 2 games per console there. The 3DS had Samus Returns and Federation Force, 2 games per console. So that's every other platform there, between handhelds and consoles, have had 1 or 2 Metroid games per. Now we get to the Nintendo Wii, and it either ties with the Switch, or you could make a case that it beats the Switch, depending on how you look at things, because the Nintendo Wii released Metroid Prime 3 and Metroid Other M as 2 sole individual full-priced AAA Metroid games, but then they did release the Metroid Prime Trilogy. So, how do we count that in this conversation? Tough to say. Right off the bat, the Metroid Prime Trilogy is already re-releasing one of the default Wii games because Metroid Prime 3, the identical game that you could already buy on the Wii, was packaged in there, right? So that's not really a new game. But it did include redone versions or updated versions of Metroid Primes 1 and 2. And they didn't really change anything visually. They didn't totally remake the game the way Metroid Prime Remastered was done on the Nintendo Switch. But they did certainly update the controls. And that was a big deal. And they created brand new menus and a brand new way to play that game between the motion controls and how you switched weapons and some of the options and the options menus. So, you know, and even the start screen and the menu screen for the main game itself, the Metroid Prime Trilogy itself, was changed and updated. You could actually even argue that they took a few things away because you do not have any of the default menu screens for the 3 Prime games at that time. They took those away in favor of a newly created start screen. So, you know, you got some give and take there. At the end of the day, they really did update Primes 1 and 2 for the trilogy. And so, do we say that there are 4 Metroid games available on the Wii if you include Prime 1, Prime 2, and Prime 3, and Prime Other M? So, I'm mixed on it. You know, I don't really know, but it's worth noting that you either have 2 games with Metroid Prime 3 and Other M, or you have 3 games with Prime 3, Other M, and the Prime Trilogy, or you could say you have 4 games if you look at all 3 Trilogy games plus Other M. I think personally, for myself as a Metroid fan, the way I break down the Wii's release of Metroid games is to say, you know what? There were 3 games. There was Metroid Prime 3, there was Metroid Other M, and there was Metroid Prime Trilogy. Not a whole lot of changes to the trilogy, so it does kind of fall more in just a re-release category than a remaster or a remake, the way Prime Remastered is on the Switch. But it's such an incredible package. It is the best singular, Metroid gaming product I think you can buy. Honestly, for the value and for everything it is and for the games included, the Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Wii, my favorite game is Metroid Prime. But as far as just a singular Metroid package you can buy, I gotta give it to Metroid Prime Trilogy. But let's move on from the Wii and what I'm counting as 3 games and come back to the Switch. Because the Switch also is the only other console that has 3 games made and released for it. And when you look at what they are, a remaster/remake of one of the best games of all time with Metroid Prime Remastered, and then that brand new 2D game and that brand new Prime game, it's untouchable. And so, man, when I start to really factor in what the Switch's library looks like, and I'll even use my lens as a Metroid fan, and if you're a Metroid fan, I think you should do the same. You know, I'm a nostalgia-based guy. I look back on the NES and the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube with fond memories. That's like my 3 favorite gaming consoles of all time. And I say for their respective times, they were incredible for what they did. But when I really look at the Switch's library, now that Prime 4 is added to it, and also Metroid Dread was released for this console on top of all the other games, the Zelda games, the Mario games, and just everything happening. I mean, third-party games like Bayonetta 3 and Astral Chain, I don't know, the list could go on and on. But as a Metroid fan, the Switch probably has Maybe not even probably. I think I might just say it has the best library of any Nintendo console ever. Something that I've championed before online for many years, whether it's on Twitter or mentioning it on my YouTube channel or whatever, is the fact that the 2000s represent an incredible decade for the Metroid franchise. There were so many games. The series was never more prolific than the periods between 2002 and 2010. Because between those years, we got the entire Metroid Prime trilogy, we got Metroid Fusion, we got Metroid Other M, the Prime trilogy package itself released for the Nintendo Wii, like I said, Zero Mission, my favorite 2D Metroid game, was released. It's insane. There were so many Metroid Prime Hunters. It's incredible. I don't know the count off the top of my head. I just named them all, but it's in the range of like 7 to 8 Metroid games released in just the decade of the 2000s. So there was never been a better time to be a Metroid fan than the 2000s. However, the 2020s are now catching up big time because the 2010s were a drought. All we got was, Metroid Prime Federation Force and Samus Returns, and I love those games. I love Samus Returns. Federation Force, it's fine, but it's not great, but it's okay, whatever. But Samus Returns is amazing. But the 2020s, they're catching up fast. Like I said, we already have these 3 games I'm focusing on. Metroid Dread, Prime Remastered, and now Prime 4 coming theoretically next year in 2025, according to the teaser trailer we have to go on currently. And just by the singular, momentous occasions that Dread and Prime 4 represent, that I've already discussed in this video, they carry so much extra weight that it's hard to deny that the 2020s is in the position by the end of this decade to potentially match what the 2000s offered if Nintendo continues to give us more Metroid games of this caliber on the Switch or on the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm going to leave you with this final nugget to chew on if you're a Metroid fan or a Nintendo fan, or just a game fan who likes good video games, because Metroid is a great video game series. So here's this nugget I want to leave you with, all right? To bounce around in your noggins. And that's that on top of these 3 games I've talked about, Dread, Prime Remastered, and Prime 4, there are a couple of other Metroid games that I think we might also be seeing release in the next couple of years. So within this decade. Obviously, a Prime 2 and a Prime 3 remaster, re-release, remake, whatever they might do, if they re-release those games with any sort of level of, care put into them, that's 2 more games that might fall into that Metroid Prime remastered category of a Metroid re-release, okay? If they're just straight ports, that's one thing, but if they get some kind of significant remaster treatment, that's a big deal. And I think that we all know and believe, and there has been things floating around out there that leads to this as well, I think we have reason to believe that Mercury Steam is probably working on another 2D Metroid game, almost for sure with Yoshio Sakamoto. So if we get Metroid 6, or even something insane like a Super Metroid remake, because they've already remade Metroid 1, they've already remade Metroid 2, a lot of people have said, why don't they remake Super Metroid? I don't know that I believe that they would, but I also kind of do, because Samus Returns was kind of a game changer in that respect. So if we get another 2D Metroid game from Mercury Steam, or from someone else, if Nintendo wants to surprise us, whatever, we could potentially be looking at 3 more games to add to this 2020s decade of Metroid. So, this part is all theoretical and speculation, but as a Metroid fan, I'm obligated to do this for you guys, and for my own fanship. So maybe the 2020s gives us Metroid Dread, Metroid Prime Remastered, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Metroid Prime 2 Remaster, Metroid Prime 3 Remaster, and then another 2D Metroid game. Metroid 6, Super Metroid Remake, whatever this might be. 6 huge, significant games, which would be spanning remasters and remakes, and also brand new games. Pretty amazing, man. So we'll see what the future holds, the upcoming years. Right now, let's, end this video by reshifting our focus back onto Metroid Prime 4 and appreciating what the Nintendo Switch has given us as Metroid fans. Again, we had the prolific 2000s. We had a really big drought in the 2010s. Even though we did get 2 games, it wasn't a total wasteland, but it was basically a drought. And then Nintendo has come back in the 2020s in the Switch era, thanks to the huge success of this console. And they said, hey, Metroid fans, let's give you some more goods. And Dread, Prime Remastered, and Prime 4, man, I just feel like, as the kids would say, we're eating pretty good, right? I feel like we're eating pretty good. And I'm very thankful to Nintendo, to Sakamoto, to Mercury Steam, to Tanabe and Retro Studios, and everyone who's just making sure that Samus and the Metroid franchise has a new life in the Switch era. So appreciative of that, so thankful. And yeah, as a Metroid fan, I think that that's all I had to say. I wanted to make sure that we all took this time to appreciate what we're actually seeing happen and to look forward to Metroid Prime 4 Beyond next year. So that's what I have to say, and that's about it.